Have you ever watched a candle flame dance in the darkness, casting shadows that seem to move with a life of their own? Have you ever tried to blow one out, only to watch it rekindle itself, as if some unseen hand were relighting it? I have, and I wish to God I never had. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and what I'm about to tell you happened in the autumn of 1835, in the hills of Western Virginia. I was 23 then, fresh out of university in Philadelphia, with dreams of making my fortune in law. When word came that my great-uncle Cornelius had died and left me his estate near Blackford Hollow, I thought Providence had smiled upon me at last. The letter from the executor arrived on a gray September morning. Uncle Cornelius, whom I'd never met, had apparently amassed considerable wealth through means the letter didn't specify. His estate included a mansion, 200 acres of prime Virginia farmland, and what the executor described as various holdings and investments of substantial value. There was, however, one peculiar stipulation. I must take residence in the house for at least 1 full year before I could claim full ownership. Otherwise, everything would pass to the state. I should have questioned why a wealthy man would die without closer heirs. I should have wondered why the executor seemed so eager to transfer the property. But youth and greed make fools of us all. The journey from Philadelphia took 5 days by coach and horseback. As I traveled deeper into Virginia's hill country, the landscape grew increasingly wild and isolated. The final day's ride took me along a narrow mountain road that seemed to wind forever through dense forest. Not once did I encounter another traveler. It was nearly dusk when I finally glimpsed Blackford House through the trees. Even in the failing light, I could see it was magnificent. A 3-story Georgian mansion of red brick and white columns, surrounded by carefully maintained grounds. Yet something about it unsettled me immediately. Perhaps it was the way no birds sang in the surrounding trees, or how the wind seemed to die completely as I approached the iron gates. The house stood on a rise overlooking Blackford Hollow, a small valley settlement I could barely make out in the gathering darkness below. Smoke rose from chimneys down there, but no lights flickered in any windows. Strange, I thought, for the hour was not yet so late. A servant was waiting for me at the main entrance, a gaunt, elderly man named Josiah who claimed to have served the Blackford family for 40 years. His eyes never quite met mine as he helped me with my bags. "Welcome to Blackford House, Master Whitmore," he said in a voice like dry leaves. "Your uncle, that is, Master Cornelius, he left very specific instructions for your arrival." "Instructions?" I asked, following him into a grand foyer dominated by a sweeping staircase. The air inside was thick with the scent of beeswax and something else. Something sweet and cloying I couldn't identify. "Yes, sir." "About the candles." It was then I noticed them. Candles everywhere, on every table, in every wall sconce, arranged in elaborate candelabras throughout the foyer. All of them lit, filling the space with a warm, golden glow that should have been welcoming but somehow wasn't. "Good Lord," I said. "Why so many?" Josiah paused at the foot of the stairs, still not looking at me directly. "The Blackford family tradition, sir. Master Cornelius was most insistent. The candles must never be extinguished. Never. Not even for a moment." I laughed, thinking it some eccentric quirk of my late uncle. "Surely you blow them out when you retire for the evening?" "No, sir." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They burn through the night. Every night. We replace them as needed, but they must never go dark. Master Cornelius was very clear about that in his will. It's a condition of your inheritance, sir." "A condition? You mean to say I must keep candles burning constantly for an entire year?" "Yes, sir. Every room, every hallway, every night. The servants will maintain them, of course. You need only ensure they're never deliberately extinguished." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but something in Josiah's manner stopped me. There was fear in his eyes, genuine, bone-deep fear. "And if I refuse this ridiculous requirement, then the estate passes immediately to the state, sir. And—" he hesitated, seeming to struggle with his words. "And I wouldn't recommend it, sir. The Blackford family has kept the candles burning for near on 70 years now. There are reasons, sir. Good reasons." That night, As I lay in the master bedroom surrounded by the flickering light of 24 candles, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows on the walls seemed to move independently of the flames that cast them, and more than once, I could have sworn I heard whispering voices in the walls themselves. But it wasn't until I rose to use the water closet that I noticed something truly disturbing. One of the candles near the window had gone out, whether from a draft or some other cause, I couldn't say. I moved to relight it from another flame, but before I could even reach it, the wick burst back to life on its own. I stood frozen, watching that impossible flame dance. And in its light, for just a moment, I thought I saw a face in the window, pale, gaunt, with eyes that burned like the candles themselves. When I blinked, it was gone. Sleep eluded me that first night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of watching presences, and the constant flicker of candlelight through my eyelids created a restless, orange-tinted darkness. When dawn finally came, painting the mountains beyond my window in shades of purple and gold, I was exhausted but determined to get answers. After a breakfast served by Josiah's wife, Martha, a woman who seemed even more nervous than her husband, I announced my intention to explore the house and grounds. Josiah appeared troubled by this but didn't object. He merely reminded me, once again, about the candles. "Should you find any that have died, sir, relight them immediately. Don't leave them dark, not even for a moment." The house was even grander than I'd initially realized. 3 stories of rooms filled with fine furniture, paintings, and curiosities from around the world. But in every room, on every surface, candles burned. I counted over 300 in the house alone. The cost of maintaining such an elaborate arrangement must have been staggering. It was in the library that I found the first real clues about the Blackford family's obsession. The room was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, comfortable reading chairs, and a massive oak desk. But what caught my attention was a series of journals arranged chronologically on a special shelf, each bearing the Blackford family crest. I pulled out the earliest volume, dated 1765, and began to read. The flowing script belonged to Aldrich Blackford, apparently the patriarch who had first built the house. His early entries were mundane, accounts of land purchases, crop yields, social engagements with other prominent Virginia families. But then came an entry from October 1766 that made my blood run cold. "The thing we have done cannot be undone. He assures me the binding will hold, but the price, God forgive us, the price. 7 souls from the hollow, freely given they said, though what choice did those poor wretches have? The prosperity is assured, promises, for us and our line, so long as the flames burn eternal. But I see them sometimes in the smoke, in the shadows. They watch, they wait. Should the darkness ever return to this house?" The entry ended there, incomplete. I flipped forward, finding increasingly frantic passages about nightmares, unexplained incidents, servants fleeing in terror. Then, in an entry from 1768, was right about one thing: we prosper. Our tobacco fetches twice the price of our neighbors, our investments return threefold, and sickness passes our household by. But the candles, God, the candles! Margaret swears she sees them moving in the walls, pulled down into the dark places. We've tripled our order from the chandler. They must not go out. They must never go out. I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't notice Josiah enter until he cleared his throat. I looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his face grave. "I see you found the family journals, sir. What happened here, Josiah? What did they do?" He entered slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "I've served this family since I was a boy, Master Whitmore. My father served them before me, and his father before him. We know the stories, though speaking them aloud." He shuddered. "It's said that Aldrich Blackford made a bargain, sir. The kind of bargain no Christian man should make." "With whom?" "There was a man, though perhaps man isn't the right word, named Erasmus Crane. He came to Blackford Hollow in 1766, claiming to be a traveling scholar. But the things he knew, the things he could do, he showed Aldrich Blackford ways to ensure his family's success for generations. But every bargain has a price. 7 souls from the hollow, I said, remembering the journal entry. Josiah's face went white. You've read that far, then? Yes, sir. 7 souls. The 7 founding families of Blackford Hollow, to be precise. They thought they were entering a partnership for mutual prosperity. What they got was something else entirely. What happened to them? They vanished one October night in 1766. All 7 families, men, women, children. 28 souls in total. Their homes were found empty, candles still burning on their tables, food still warm on their plates. No trace of them was ever found, except here, sir, in this house. Sometimes, when the candles flicker just so, servants claim to see them in the shadows, waiting, watching, held back only by the light. I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but the memory of that face in the window, the self-lighting candle, made mockery of my rationality. And my uncle continued this arrangement? He had no choice, sir. None of the Blackfords did. The prosperity came as promised. Your uncle was one of the wealthiest men in Virginia. But the price remained. The candles must burn. Always. Forever. Or else. Or else what? Josiah moved to the window, gazing out at the peaceful-looking valley below. Or else they return, sir. The 7 families. And they're hungry. 70 years of hunger, Master Whitmore. 70 years of waiting in the darkness, held back only by flame. That night, I sat in the dining room, surrounded by the light of 50 candles, trying to make sense of it all. Supernatural bargains? Vanished families? It seemed like madness. Yet the evidence was all around me. The compulsive maintenance of hundreds of candles, the terror in the servants' eyes, the journals documenting decades of fear. It was then that I made my first terrible mistake. In frustration and disbelief, I deliberately blew out a single candle on the dining table. The effect was immediate. The temperature in the room plummeted so quickly my breath came out in white puffs. The remaining flames flickered wildly, as if in a gale, though no wind stirred. And in the corner where the shadows gathered thickest, I saw them. Shapes that weren't quite human anymore, twisted and elongated by decades of darkness. Their eyes, if eyes they were, burned with a cold fire that was the antithesis of candlelight. They pressed against the boundary of shadow, reaching, grasping, held back only by the remaining flames. With shaking hands, I grabbed another candle and relit the one I'd extinguished. The shapes retreated, melding back into ordinary shadow, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. But I knew they were still there, waiting, and I had 11 months and 3 weeks left to go. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of candlelight and creeping dread. I threw myself into research, desperate to understand the nature of my inheritance. The Blackford journals became my obsession, each volume revealing new horrors about the family I'd never known I was connected to. Aldrich's son, Marcus, had inherited in 1771. His journal spoke of attempts to break the bargain, bringing in priests for exorcisms, learned men from universities, even practitioners of what he called the ancient arts. Nothing worked. The candles that were deliberately extinguished would relight themselves eventually, but the period of darkness always came with a cost. Servants would be found dead, their faces twisted in expressions of unimaginable terror. Livestock would be discovered turned inside out. And always the shadows grew bolder. By the 3rd generation, the Blackfords had stopped fighting and started accepting. They maintained the candles religiously, enjoyed their unnatural prosperity, and tried not to think about what lurked in the darkness. But the isolation grew. No family would marry into the Blackfords after the stories spread. Servants came only from the poorest, most desperate families, and even they rarely lasted more than a year. My Uncle Cornelius, I learned, had been the last. Never married, no children. He had searched for 30 years for any living relative who might take on the burden. I was, apparently, his last hope. A great-nephew he'd never met, distant enough to have escaped the rumors, naive enough to accept the inheritance. On my 10th day in the house, I made a disturbing discovery. While exploring the cellar, a vast, stone-walled space that predated the house itself. I found a door I hadn't noticed before. It was small, almost hidden behind a wine rack, and locked with a mechanism that looked far older than anything else in the house. Josiah found me examining it that evening. "I wouldn't, sir," he said quietly. "Some doors are locked for good reason. What's behind it? The old foundation. From before the house. From before the bargain." He looked genuinely ill. "Master Cornelius went down there once. Just once. He came back changed. Started talking about feeding times and contractual obligations. Made us increase the candles by half. But my curiosity was stronger than my fear. A fatal flaw that would cost me dearly. That night, I took a ring of keys I'd found in my uncle's study and returned to the cellar. Took several tries, but finally one ancient key turned in the lock. The door opened onto stairs that descended into darkness so complete it seemed solid. My candle's light penetrated only a few feet ahead. The walls were carved stone, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. As I descended, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Candle holders built into the walls, hundreds of them, all empty. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a circular chamber. The floor was marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. In the center sat something that shouldn't exist. An altar of black stone that absorbed light rather than reflected it. And on that altar was a book. Not just any book, but something that radiated wrongness, bound in what I desperately hoped wasn't human skin. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I opened it. The pages were filled with text in multiple languages, Latin, Greek, and something else that predated both. But scattered throughout were passages in English, written in Aldrich Blackford's hand. As I read, the truth of the bargain became clear. Erasmus Crane hadn't been human. He'd been something far older, something that fed on human souls but was bound by ancient rules. The bargain had been simple in its horror. The 7 families of Blackford Hollow had been given as payment for perpetual prosperity. But they hadn't been killed, that would have been merciful. Instead, they'd been transformed, pulled into a state between life and death, existing in the spaces between light and darkness. The candles weren't just keeping them at bay. The candles were keeping them trapped, preventing them from either fully manifesting or finding peace. They were prisoners, tortured by decades of half-existence, and their torment fed the prosperity spell. Every moment of their suffering translated into wealth and success for the Blackfords. But there was more. The contract had a clause, written in blood on the final page. If the Blackford line ever ended, if no heir maintained the candles for a full year, the bargain would break. The 7 families would be freed, not to find peace, but to take their revenge on the world that had forgotten them. And they would start with whoever had failed to maintain their prison. I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't notice the temperature dropping until my breath began to fog. The candle in my hand flickered, and I realized with horror that I'd been down there for hours. The candle was burning low, perhaps minutes from going out. I turned to flee, but they were already there. Not fully manifested, but visible enough in the dying light. The 7 families of Blackford Hollow, or what remained of them. Their faces were stretched and distorted, their bodies flickering between solid and shadow. Children who should have grown old decades ago reached out with fingers that passed through flesh but left trails of ice in their wake. One of them spoke, its voice like wind through a cemetery, "Free us." Another, which might once have been a woman, added, "Or join us." I ran. I ran as I'd never run before, taking the stairs 3 at a time, my candle flickering dangerously with each step. Behind me, I could hear them following, their forms becoming more solid as my light weakened. Just as the candle died, I burst through the door and slammed it shut, my hands fumbling for the lock. Something pounded on the other side, shaking the ancient wood. But the door held, and gradually the pounding stopped. I collapsed against the wine rack, gasping for breath. When I finally made it upstairs, I found Josiah waiting, his face grim. "Now you understand, sir," he said simply. "The burden you've inherited. That night I couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every flicker of candlelight revealed glimpses of twisted faces. I understood now why Uncle Cornelius had been so desperate to pass on the inheritance. This wasn't a gift, it was a curse. And I had 11 months left to endure it. By November, I had developed what I called the routine. Wake at dawn. Check every candle in my bedroom. Breakfast in the dining room, counting flames as I ate. Tour the house room by room, ensuring no candle had died in the night. The servants helped, of course, but the responsibility was mine. The weight of it pressed down on me like a physical thing. I began to notice things I'd missed before. The way shadows moved against the direction of the light. The faces that appeared in the smoke when candles were first lit. The whispers that came from the walls in the dead of night. 28 voices. I counted them once, speaking in a language that predated words. My health began to deteriorate. Dark circles ringed my eyes from lack of sleep. My hands developed a permanent tremor from constantly relighting candles. I lost weight, my appetite destroyed by the constant sweet smell of burning wax that permeated everything. But worse than the physical effects were the mental ones. I started seeing them even in daylight, when the candles should have been unnecessary. Transparent figures walking through walls, standing behind me in mirrors, reaching out from portraits on the walls. They were getting stronger or I was getting weaker, perhaps both. One night in mid-November, a storm struck. Wind howled through the valley like the voices of the damned, and rain lashed against the windows with supernatural force. I knew what was coming before it happened. The wind would find its way in, and candles would die. I positioned myself in the main hallway with a basket of fresh candles and matches, ready to relight any that failed. Josiah and Martha huddled in the kitchen, refusing to help. Storms, they said, were when the boundaries weakened most. The first candle went out at midnight. Then another, and another. I ran from room to room, relighting them as fast as I could. But for every one I restored, 2 more seemed to die. The shadows grew longer, darker, more substantial. I could see them clearly now, the 7 families, pressing against the failing barrier of light. A child's voice, sweet and terrible, spoke from the darkness. "Why do you keep us here? We only want to go home." "You have no home," I gasped, lighting another candle. "Not anymore." "Neither do you," an adult voice replied. "You're just another prisoner. Another Blackford, maintaining our cage while it becomes your own." They were right, I realized. I was as trapped as they were, bound by the terms of an inheritance I couldn't refuse without unleashing them on the world. The storm raged on, and I fought my desperate battle against the darkness, but for the first time, I wondered if it might not be better to just let go. Dawn finally came, the storm exhausted. I had won barely. Every candle was relit. The shadows returned to their proper places. But something had changed. I could feel it in the air, see it in the way the servants looked at me. The house itself felt different, as if it had shifted somehow during the night. That evening, while searching for more matches in my uncle's study, I found a hidden compartment in his desk. Inside was a letter, addressed to me. "Thomas, if you're reading this, then you've accepted the inheritance and discovered the truth. I'm sorry, more sorry than words can express. But you must understand, I searched for years for a way to break the bargain without releasing them. There is no way. Erasmus Crane was thorough in his contract. But I did discover something. The bargain specified the Blackford line, but it never specified direct descent. You are not my great-nephew. We share no blood. I chose you because you were young, ambitious, and alone, the perfect candidate to believe a lie about unexpected inheritance. This changes nothing about your situation, but everything about your choices. You are not bound by blood to maintain this horror. You can walk away. The question is, will you? Can you condemn the world to face what we created? Or will you, like me, like all of us, become another keeper of the darkness? The choice and the burden are yours. Cornelius Blackford. I read the letter 3 times before it fully sank in. I wasn't a Blackford. I had no obligation to maintain this prison. I could leave, Let the candles die, and whatever happened would not be my responsibility. Would it? That night, I stood in the dining room, lighter in hand, staring at the sea of flames before me. One action, or rather one inaction, and I would be free. But 28 souls would be released as well. Not to find peace, but to seek vengeance. How many would die? How many would suffer? As if sensing my thoughts, they appeared in the shadows, more solid than ever before. The 7 families watched me, waiting. One of them, a man who might have been a father once, spoke. We were innocent. We trusted Aldrich Blackford. He betrayed us for gold and comfort. Why should we remain prisoners for his crime? Because you're not innocent anymore? I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. 70 years of torment has changed you. You're not the families who vanished anymore. You're something else. Something that feeds on fear and darkness. And whose fault is that? A woman's voice asked. Who made us into this? I had no answer. They were right. They were victims. But they were also threats, twisted by decades of unnatural existence into something that could no longer be called human. I lowered the lighter and left the room. But the doubt remained, gnawing at me like a cancer. Every day, the moral weight of my decision grew heavier. Every night, the whispers grew louder. December brought snow to Blackford Hollow, blanketing the valley in deceptive peace. From my window, I could see smoke rising from chimneys in the distant settlement. Families preparing for Christmas, unaware of the horror that lurked just above them on the hill. The irony wasn't lost on me. I possessed wealth beyond measure, yet I was the most miserable soul in Virginia. The servants had begun to avoid me. My appearance had become ghastly, hollow cheeks, wild eyes, hands stained permanently with candle wax. I talked to myself, or rather, to them. The 7 families had become my constant companions, always visible now in the corners of my vision, sometimes speaking, sometimes just watching. It was 2 weeks before Christmas when she appeared. I was in the library, reading yet another Blackford journal, when I noticed someone sitting in the chair across from me. Not one of the shadow people, but a living, breathing woman. She was young, perhaps 20, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. Her dress was decades out of fashion, the style from the 1760s. "Hello, Thomas," she said, and her voice was warm, human, nothing like the whispers from the walls. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "My name is Elizabeth Crane. I think you've heard of my father." My blood turned to ice. Erasmus Crane's daughter? She smiled sadly. His greatest success and his greatest failure. I've been watching you, Thomas. Watching you struggle with the burden my father created. "You're dead," I said flatly. "You have to be. If you were Erasmus Crane's daughter, you'd be over 70 years old." "Death is such a limited concept," she replied. "My father taught me that. I exist differently. Not like them," she gestured toward the shadows. "But not like you either. I'm here to offer you something. I want nothing from any Crane. Not even freedom?" Despite myself, I leaned forward. "There's no freedom from this. Your father made sure of that." "My father was brilliant but not infallible. Every contract has a loophole." "His certainly does." She stood, moving to the window. "The bargain specifies that the candles must burn for 1 year under a Blackford air. You're not a Blackford, as you've discovered. But more importantly, it doesn't specify that the air must survive the year. You're suggesting I kill myself? I'm suggesting a trade. Your life for theirs. You die, the contract considers the year fulfilled. A Blackford heir maintained the candles until death. The 7 families are released, but not as vengeful spirits. They'd be freed properly, allowed to find peace. And what would you gain from this?" Her smile turned bitter. "Redemption, perhaps. A chance to undo one of my father's many cruelties. He destroyed those families to prove a point about the nature of sacrifice. I've spent 70 years trying to atone for his sins. How do I know you're telling the truth?" She pulled out a small journal, bound in black leather. This was my father's. His true writings, not the lies he told the Blackfords. "Read it. You'll find the truth about the contract, about the loopholes." About the choice you really have. She placed the journal on the table and walked toward the door. You have 3 days to decide, Thomas. After that, the winter solstice arrives, and the barriers weaken further. If the 7 families break free on their own, without the contract being properly dissolved, they'll be the monsters the Blackfords always feared. But if you choose to end it properly. She vanished mid-sentence, simply fading away like morning mist. The journal remained, solid and real, radiating the same wrongness as the book in the cellar. I spent the next 2 days reading Erasmus Crane's journal. It was worse than anything in the Blackford records. He wrote casually of sacrifices, of souls bartered and consumed, of entire villages destroyed to test his theories. The 7 families of Blackford Hollow were just one experiment among many. But Elizabeth had been right about the contract. Hidden in the legal complexities and arcane terminology was the loophole she described. A death would complete the contract, releasing all parties from their obligations. The 7 families would be freed, truly freed, not released as vengeful spirits. On the 3rd night, December 21st, the winter solstice, I made my decision. I gathered every candle I could find into the main hall, over 500 in total, arranged in careful patterns. If I was going to die, I would do it properly, ensuring not a single shadow remained to corrupt the process. Josiah and Martha I sent away, giving them gold and instructions to leave Virginia entirely. At midnight, Elizabeth appeared again. You've decided. I have, but not what you think. I pulled out a different book, one I'd found hidden in the cellar, predating even Erasmus Crane. Your father wasn't the first to make such bargains. This details older contracts, older rules. There's another way. Her eyes widened. That's impossible. I searched for decades. You searched your father's work. I searched his sources. I opened the book to a marked page. A living sacrifice can break the contract, yes, but so can a reversal. If someone willingly takes the place of the 7 families, becomes the shadow in the darkness, the original prisoners can be freed while the bargain continues. You would condemn yourself to their fate? I'm already condemned. Look at me. I'm barely human anymore myself. At least this way, I saved 28 souls while containing the evil. I lit a match. But I need your help. The ritual requires someone of Crane blood to speak the words. Elizabeth was silent for a long moment. You understand what you're choosing? An eternity of imprisonment, sustained only by candlelight, neither living nor dead. I understand. The question is, will you help me? She took the book with trembling hands. Yes. God forgive me, yes. The preparations took until 3 in the morning. Every detail had to be perfect. One mistake and instead of replacing the 7 families, I would simply join them, adding to the horror rather than alleviating it. Elizabeth worked alongside me, her knowledge of her father's arts proving invaluable and terrible in equal measure. We drew symbols on the floor in salt and ash, carefully copying the patterns from the ancient book. The candles had to be arranged in specific configurations, 7 circles of 7, with paths between them forming a septagram. At each point where the lines crossed, we placed items belonging to the imprisoned families, things I'd found hidden in the cellar. A child's wooden toy, a woman's locket, a man's pipe, small treasures that had once meant something to living people. As we worked, the 7 families gathered. They sensed something changing, their shadow forms growing more agitated as the night wore on. They whispered constantly now, a susurrus of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. What are you doing? Stop this. You don't understand. Please. But there was hope in their voices too, for the first time since I'd arrived at Blackford House. At 4 o'clock, as the darkest part of night settled over the valley, we were ready. I stood in the center of the septagram, holding a single black candle, one that had never been lit, one that Erasmus Crane himself had crafted for the original ritual. Elizabeth stood outside the circles, the book open in her hands. Last chance to reconsider, she said softly. Read the words. She began to speak in that language that predated human speech, words that seemed to twist reality around them. The candles flickered in unison, their flames turning from yellow to white to a blue so pale it was almost invisible. The temperature plummeted until ice formed on the windows. The 7 families materialized fully for the first time, no longer shadows but translucent figures of the people they'd once been. I could see them clearly now, farmers and merchants, mothers and fathers, children who'd never had the chance to grow up. Their faces were twisted with decades of torment, but underneath, I could still see the humans they'd been. "No!" one of them cried out, a man in what had once been fine clothes. "You don't know what you're offering. The hunger, the endless hunger." "I know," I replied, my voice steady despite my terror. "But you've suffered enough. All of you have suffered enough." Elizabeth continued reading, her voice growing stronger. The symbols on the floor began to glow with a sickly green light. The black candle in my hand grew hot, the wax melting over my fingers, searing my flesh, but I didn't let go. Then Erasmus Crane appeared. Not physically, he was long dead, but his presence filled the room like smoke, choking and oppressive. His voice boomed from everywhere at once. "Foolish child, you think to undo my work? You think to break a contract written in blood and souls." "Not break," Elizabeth said, not pausing in her recitation. "Transfer, fulfill. Your contract will stand, Father, just with a different prisoner. My daughter, my treacherous daughter. You would help this mortal? I would undo your cruelty wherever I can." The presence roared in fury, and the house itself shook. Plaster fell from the ceiling, and several candles toppled over, but their flames continued to burn even lying on their sides. The 7 families huddled together, terror replacing the hope in their ghostly faces. "He's coming," one of the children whispered. "The dark man is coming." But Elizabeth didn't stop reading. As she reached the climax of the incantation, the black candle in my hand suddenly burst into flame. Not ordinary fire, but something that burned without heat, darkness visible. I felt it spreading through me, replacing my blood with shadow, my breath with smoke. The transformation was agony. Every cell in my body screamed as it was pulled between states of being. I was dying and being born, dissolving and coalescing, becoming something that existed in the spaces between light and darkness. Through the pain, I saw the 7 families beginning to change as well. The translucency faded from their forms, color returning to their faces. The twisted expressions of torment smoothed into confusion, then wonder, then joy. They were becoming human again, truly human, not the corrupted shadows they'd been for 70 years. "It's working," Elizabeth breathed, tears streaming down her face as she continued the incantation. But Erasmus Crane's presence wasn't finished. The darkness in the room coalesced into a vague humanoid shape, featureless save for 2 burning red points where eyes should have been. "If you complete this ritual," he thundered, "you will take on more than just their imprisonment. You will inherit their hunger, their rage, their 70 years of torment. It will drive you mad within a decade." "Then I'll go mad," I gasped through the transformation. "But they'll be free." "Fool, you could have had everything. Wealth, power, a life of luxury, built on the suffering of innocence," I managed. "I've seen what that luxury costs." The dark figure raised what might have been an arm, and a wave of pure malevolence crashed over me. But the ritual was too far along to stop. The black candle had completely melted now, the dark fire spreading from my hand throughout my body. I could feel myself becoming less solid, less real, more connected to the shadows than the light. Elizabeth spoke the final words of the incantation, and the world exploded. Every candle in the house went out simultaneously. For a moment, there was absolute darkness. Not just the absence of light, but a void that seemed to swallow even the concept of illumination. In that darkness, I felt myself scatter, my consciousness spreading throughout the house, into every shadow, every dark corner, every space where light didn't reach. Then, one by one, the candles relit themselves. But the room had changed. Where the 7 families had stood, now there were 7 groups of people, solid, breathing, alive. They looked around in bewilderment, touching themselves, touching each other, sobbing with the joy of physical sensation after 7 decades of shadow existence. And where I had stood, I looked down at myself, or tried to. I had no body, not in the traditional sense. I existed as a presence, a consciousness spread throughout the shadows of Blackford House. When the candlelight flickered, I could almost manifest a form, translucent and shifting, but never quite solid. Elizabeth closed the book, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. It's done. The 7 families, the Moores, the Carters, the Jennisons, the Blackwells, the Ashfords, the Wyness, and the Hartleys, stood before us, restored to life but still wearing the clothes from 1766. They looked at each other, at Elizabeth, at the space where I hovered between being and unbeing. "We're free," Mrs. Moore asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "You're free," Elizabeth confirmed. "The contract is fulfilled. Thomas has taken your place." "But what of the world?" Mr. Carter asked. 70 years have passed. Our homes, our lives. Gone, Elizabeth said gently. "But you have a second chance. The gold in this house's vaults. It belongs to you, payment for your suffering. Take it and start new lives. Leave Virginia. Leave America if you must. But live." One of the children, a girl no more than 10, approached where I floated. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us." I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a whisper that seemed to emanate from every shadow in the room. "Live well. Live free. Make it worth the sacrifice." They filed out slowly, still in shock, led by Elizabeth, who promised to help them adjust to the world of 1835. As the last of them left, she turned back to look at me. "The candles will always burn now," she said. "The house itself will maintain them. It's part of the magic. You won't be alone. I'll visit when I can." Then she was gone, and I was alone with my new existence. That was 13 years ago. 13 years of existing in the shadows of Blackford House, sustained and imprisoned by eternal candlelight. I thought I understood what I was choosing that night, but I was wrong. No mortal mind can truly comprehend eternity until it's trapped within it. The first year was the hardest. The hunger Elizabeth's father had warned about came quickly, not for food, but for life, for substance, for the solidity I'd given up. I could feel the warmth of the candles but never touch them. I could see the world beyond the windows but never reach it. I existed in a state of perpetual longing, always reaching for what I could never grasp. The house drew visitors occasionally, treasure hunters who'd heard rumors of Blackford gold, traveling salesmen seeking shelter from storms. Each time, I had to resist the overwhelming urge to extinguish the candles, to pull them into the darkness with me. The hunger whispered constantly, "Take them. Make them like you. You don't have to be alone." But I held firm. I'd made my choice to save the 7 families, not to create new prisoners. Elizabeth visited as promised, though less frequently as the years passed. She taught me to communicate through the flames, making them flicker in patterns, casting shadows that formed words on walls. She brought news of the 7 families, how they'd used Blackford gold to establish new lives in California, far from the cursed ground of Virginia. "The Moores opened a general store," she told me during one visit. "The Carters started a shipping company. The children are growing up, having children of their own. They're happy, Thomas. You gave them that. It should have been comfort enough. Some days it was, but the nights were long, and the hunger grew stronger." I began to understand why the 7 families had become so twisted, so desperate. The darkness doesn't just imprison, it transforms. Every shadow that passed through me left a trace of its coldness. Every flicker of candlelight reminded me of what I'd lost. By the 5th year, I'd learned to manifest more substantially, though only in complete darkness. When storms knocked out candles, in those brief moments before they relit themselves, I could almost feel solid again. But those moments were dangerous. Each time I manifested fully, it became harder to return to the shadows. The temptation to blow out all the candles, to reclaim physical form regardless of the consequences, grew stronger. The house itself changed over the years. Without the Blackfords to maintain it, it fell into disrepair. Windows broke, letting in rain and wind. Walls cracked, floors rotted. But the candles never went out. They burned without human hands to replace them, their wax never diminishing, their flames never dying. The magic sustained them, and they sustained my prison. In the 10th year, a family tried to move in. The Weatherbys, a young couple with 2 children. Drawn by the low price the county was asking for the abandoned property. I tried to warn them. I made the shadows dance, spelled out leave in flickering candlelight, even managed to whisper warnings when they slept. They thought it was charm. A haunted house they could turn into a tourist attraction. They didn't understand that the haunting was real, and the ghost was hungry. The night they tried to remove the candles, fire hazard, Mr. Weatherby had said, was the night I almost broke. As they went room by room, extinguishing flames, I felt myself solidifying, gaining substance with each darkness they created. The hunger roared through me like wildfire. I could have taken them, could have pulled all 4 into the shadows, made them prisoners like I was, companions in my eternal vigil. Instead, I used my momentary solidity to relight every candle simultaneously, creating such a display of supernatural power that the Weatherbys fled and never returned. The effort left me weaker, more dispersed through the shadows. But I'd kept my promise. No new prisoners, no new victims. Now, as I tell you the story, it's 1848. 13 years of shadow existence, and I feel myself fragmenting. Not dying. I can't die anymore, but losing cohesion, spreading thinner through the darkness. Soon, I may be nothing more than a whisper in the walls, a cold spot in the corners, a feeling of being watched. But the candles still burn. They'll always burn. And as long as they do, the darkness is contained. Not the 7 families, they're free, living their lives, their children growing up in California sunshine. The darkness that's contained now is mine. The hunger, the rage, the loneliness, all mine. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, when wind howls through the broken windows and the candles flicker in unnatural patterns, I wonder if I made the right choice. Then I remember the child who thanked me, the joy on their faces as they became human again, and I know I did. The house stands empty now, avoided by locals who speak in whispers of the candles that never go out, the shadows that move wrong, the voice that sometimes speaks from nowhere. They're right to avoid it. The hunger grows stronger each year, and I don't know how much longer I can resist it. If you ever find yourself in the hills of Western Virginia, near what was once Blackford Hollow, you might see it. A decrepit mansion on a hill, windows glowing with candlelight that never dims. Don't go inside. Don't try to extinguish the flames. They're not just candles anymore. They're chains holding back something that was once a man named Thomas Whitmore, who made a choice to save 28 souls at the cost of his own. The Blackford family is gone. Their bargain is fulfilled. But the candles can't be extinguished. They must never be extinguished. For I am always hungry, always watching, always waiting in the shadows between the flames. And each year, it gets harder to remember why I chose this. Each year, the hunger grows stronger. Each year, I wonder what would happen if just one candle went out. Just one. If you've read this far, heed my warning. This story found its way out of Blackford House through methods I don't fully understand. Perhaps through the smoke of the eternal candles, perhaps through the shadows themselves. But know this, the house still stands. The candles still burn. And I'm still here, in the darkness between the flames, hungrier than ever. Should you ever encounter Blackford House, remember, the candles cannot be extinguished. They must never be extinguished. For your sake, and for mine.